President Biden is getting heat for calling China's human rights abuses cultural differences. But wait, is that true? Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Remember to support this show by liking this episode on YouTube and subscribing to this channel. For President Joe Biden, dealing with the Chinese Communist Party is going to be his biggest foreign policy challenge. But this isn't his first go-around on the China issue. Back in 2012, Biden got China. That headline didn't mean he gets China, like he understands China. It meant he took the lead on the Obama administration's China policy. And that's actually why a lot of people are nervous about the Biden administration's China policy. China looks a lot more aggressive and dangerous now than it did back in 2012. So people are worried that Biden will just use the same China strategy he did back then, which didn't work. Now, if you watch my other YouTube channel, China Uncensored, you know that China didn't just start getting aggressive back in 2012. The Chinese Communist Party has been aggressive for a long time. But in the last couple of years, we've seen a lot more people start to recognize that. Biden has said some ill-informed things about China before, like this comment nearly 2 years ago.
China is going to eat our lunch? Come on, man. They can't even figure out how to deal with the fact that they have this great division between the China Sea and the mountains in the west. They can't figure out how they're going to deal with the corruption that exists within the system. I mean, they're not bad folks, but guess what? They're not competition for us.
He later kind of walked that one back.
Do you view China as an opponent?
I view China as a competitor.
Biden has always had a reputation for putting his foot in his mouth. The term used by the media for that is a gaffe. Biden is so known for this that Time magazine has a list of top 10 Joe Biden gaffes. But earlier this week, conservative media outlets started reporting that Biden had dismissed the Chinese Communist Party's genocide of the Uyghurs, or excused that genocide as a cultural norm, or that he defended China's human rights record. That's a lot more serious than a gaffe, which means it's time for the return of our popular segment, Wait, is that true? But first, this short commercial break. Welcome back. Did Joe Biden dismiss China's genocide? It's time for Wait, is that true? The claim that Biden dismissed genocide as a different cultural norm came from one of his answers during a CNN town hall earlier this week. I'm going to play the full clip of that question and answer.
What about the Uyghurs? What about human rights abuses?
We must speak up for human rights. It's who we are. We can't. My comment to him was, and I know him well, and he knows me well. We're a 2-hour conversation.
You talked about this to him.
I talked about this too. And that's not so much refugee, but I talked about it. I said, look, Chinese leaders, if you know anything about Chinese history, it has always been the time when China has been victimized by the outer world is when they haven't been unified at home. So the central, vastly overstated, the central principle of Xi Jinping is that there must be a united, tightly controlled China. And he uses his rationale for the things he does based on that. I point out to him, no American president can be sustained as a president if he doesn't reflect the values of the United States. And so the idea, I'm not going to speak out against what he's doing in Hong Kong, what he's doing with the Uyghurs in western mountains of China, and Taiwan trying to end the one China policy by making it forceful. I said, and by the way, he said he gets it. Culturally, there are different norms at each country, and their leaders are expected to follow. But my point was that when I came back from meeting with him, traveling 17,000 miles with him when I was vice president. He was the vice president. That's how I got to know him so well, at the request of President Hu, not a joke, his predecessor, President Hu, and President Obama wanted us to get to know one another because he was going to be the president. And I came back and said they're going to end their one-child policy because they're so xenophobic they won't let anybody else in, and more people are retired than working. How can they sustain economic growth when more people are retired?
I'm starting to understand why Biden's conversation with Xi Jinping lasted 2 hours. There's a lot going on there, including the fact that President Biden seems to have repeated a Chinese Communist Party propaganda line about China's century of humiliation, that China was victimized in the past by other countries, which is why they need to keep the country tightly controlled now. It's propaganda that the Communist Party uses to justify its authoritarian rule. But let's play the part about the different norms again.
I point out to him, no American president can be sustained as a president if he doesn't reflect the values of the United States. And so the idea, I'm not going to speak out against what he's doing in Hong Kong, what he's doing with the Uyghurs in western mountains of China, and Taiwan trying to end the one China policy by making it forceful. I said, and by the way, he said he gets it. Culturally, there are different norms at each country, and their leaders are expected to follow.
Okay, it gets a little confusing there at the end, but in context, it seems like the different cultural norms he's talking about are America's cultural norms. The ones that say, as president, Biden must reflect American values and speak out about human rights. Saying that this statement was Biden dismissing genocide is a real stretch, especially after Anderson Cooper's follow-up question.
When you talk to him, though, about human rights abuses, is that as far as it goes in terms of the U.S., or is there any actual repercussions for China?
Well, there will be repercussions for China, and he knows that. What I'm doing is making clear that we, in fact, are going to continue to reassert our role as spokespersons for human rights at the UN and other agencies that have an impact on their attitude. China is trying very hard to become the world leader. And to get that moniker and to be able to do that, they have to gain the confidence of other countries. And as long as they're engaged in activity that is contrary to basic human rights, it's going to be hard for them to do that. But it's much more complicated now. I shouldn't have tried to talk China policy in 10 minutes on television here.
Well, he's probably right about that last part. There were definitely issues with what Biden said at the town hall, though, which I'll get to after the break. Welcome back. Joe Biden's comment about different cultural norms does not mean he's excusing China's genocide, like some media headlines suggest. But there are still some potential problems with what Biden said at the town hall. When he said Xi Jinping gets it about the US and China having different cultural norms, that could be interpreted as Biden saying Xi Jinping understands that America has a cultural norm where the president has to speak out about human rights, so Xi Jinping knows not to take it too seriously. I'm not saying that Biden is saying that. Like I said, by the end, it's a little hard to tell exactly what he's saying. But I'm going to make a crazy suggestion here. I'm going to suggest that we don't judge the Biden administration's China policy based on the long, rambling, somewhat confusing answers that President Biden gave on television. Instead, we should judge them on what they actually do. I know. Imagine judging an administration's entire China policy based on the president talking about how well he and Xi Jinping get along, or how much time they spent together, instead of the things that the administration actually does. Who would do something like that? The Biden administration is stuck between a rock and a hard place when it comes to China policy. On the one hand, confronting the Chinese Communist Party is one of the only things that both Democrats and Republicans agree on, which is why this New York Times article says that Biden is on a short leash when it comes to China policy. But politically speaking, the Biden administration also can't publicly agree with the Trump administration. So they have to position themselves as being just as tough on China, but more comprehensive and effective, even if that means they end up taking positions that are less effective than the Trump administration. But at least those positions are different. There's also pressure from Wall Street and U.S. companies that still want to do business in China. They want to go back to the way things were before Trump. So far, the Biden administration seems to want to find a way to both confront the Chinese regime and cooperate with it. Mr. Biden's top foreign policy advisors have also espoused views critical of China's practices, though many see potential for cooperation on issues like the coronavirus pandemic and climate change. But that's easier said than done. Plus, we're only 1 month into the Biden administration. They haven't dealt with a lot of specific issues yet, like what to do about Trump's trade deal with China, whether to continue Trump's ban on Chinese companies like TikTok, WeChat, and Huawei, and even whether to acknowledge the Trump administration's designation of the Chinese Communist Party's treatment of Uyghurs as genocide. You know, if the Biden administration comes out and says that it's not a genocide, morals aside, it's politically stupid. That would be a bigger gaffe than anything Biden said on CNN. So what do you think of Biden's China policy so far? Would you like to see me do more episodes of Wait, Is That True? Let me know in the comments below. And remember, YouTube heavily demonetizes us, and we can't make this show without you. You can support us for as little as $1 an episode at patreon.com/AmericaUncovered. Thanks for watching.